We all know that without 3.5 million evangelical Christian votes, George Bush would not be president, and we would not be in this disastrous war. The evangelical right elected George Bush. But do we really know why? Now, the true economic policies of the Republican Party since the New Deal and even earlier have basically been to support the interests of the rich and the wealthy and powerful against that of the poor and the middle class. Now, as anyone who can count to two on their fingers can understand, you will never win an election telling people, vote for me and I'll make the rich richer and the middle class poorer. So how do you win an election if you're the Republican Party? You need a smokescreen. You need so-called social issues. Now, the evangelical right is socially conservative, politically reactionary, and in certain parts of the country, namely the Bible Belt, has had a history of racism and anti-civil rights bias. And yet, these evangelicals are the strongest supporters of Israel in the country. And it's not that they particularly like Jews. It has to do what they believe about Armageddon and the rapture. The return of Jesus Christ to earth at the end of normal time to bring about the kingdom of heaven. But before this can happen, there must be the Battle of Armageddon, in which the forces of good confront the forces of evil, forces of Satan. And before that, according to the book of Revelations, the Jews must rebuild Solomon's temple in Jerusalem. And that is why the American evangelical religious right supports the survival of Israel, therefore the politics of the Israeli government, therefore arming the Israelis, therefore all the economic and political support they've given to the state of Israel. It has nothing to do with how they feel about Jews one way or the other. It's about bringing about the rapture. Now, some say that the Battle of Armageddon will actually take place in Israel. Others say, no, it will take place in Babylon. And where is Babylon? In Iraq. Now, I am no evangelical Christian, but I'd like to speak to those of you out there who are now about this prophecy and about how you have been used not by the forces of good, but by the forces of evil. That you have voted not in the service of Jesus Christ, but in the service of his adversary, the champion who will lead Satan's forces at the Battle of Armageddon, the forces of evil, the forces of the prince of liars. And think about it. If you believe in the rapture, if you believe in the Battle of Armageddon that will precede the rapture and the return of Jesus Christ, if you believe that the Jews must rebuild Solomon's temple before this happens, then you must believe in the Antichrist leading the forces of evil at the Battle of Armageddon. And if you believe that any of these revelations have any meaning, you must believe that the outcome of the Battle of Armageddon between the forces of Jesus and the forces of Satan cannot be preordained. Because without free will of some sort, this battle between good and evil becomes meaningless in the eyes of God. And so you must believe in the Antichrist. And as it is said about Satan, the Antichrist, if not the prince of liars, is the champion of the prince of liars. Think about what you voted for, and what you've put into power, and what you've unleashed upon the world. George W. Bush says he's a born-again Christian, even as you are. And of course, he wouldn't tell a lie. George Bush said there were weapons of mass destruction in Saddam Hussein's Iraq. And of course, he wouldn't tell a lie. George Bush said the war would be over atop that aircraft carrier, mission accomplished. But of course, George Bush wouldn't tell a lie. But let's consider what the book of Revelations might reveal about the true identity of George W. Bush and whether or not he would tell a lie. The book of Revelations proclaims that the Battle of Armageddon must precede the rapture. And that has caused you to vote for George W. Bush. The book of Revelations, at least in one interpretation, insists that the Battle of Armageddon will take place in Babylon, which is to say, Iraq. And the book of Revelations also says that the Antichrist will be a princely liar who will seem to be the savior of the world, of democracy, of liberty, of the American way of life. And you have voted for a president who proclaims that God is on his side. Would he tell a lie? Would the Antichrist tell a lie? Well, I would suggest to you out there, suckers, that you have been conned by the greatest con master in all of history. Because all the evidence thus far leads to the inescapable conclusion, if you believe in the revelations of Revelations, that George W. Bush, the President of the United States, who was put into office twice by the votes of the true believers in the rebuilding of Solomon's temple, in the Battle of Armageddon in Iraq, and in the rapture, is in fact the champion of the other side in the coming of Armageddon. That George W. Bush is himself the Antichrist.